Hello and welcome to the Kent Police and Crime Commissioner Hustings in association with the University of Kent and the Medway African and Caribbean Association. I'm Paul Francis and I'll be your host for this evening's event. We'll be discussing and debating topics that affect you and the County of Kent, including police and their relationship with the community, county lines and drugs, and what crime has affected the county the most and how coronavirus has changed policing in Kent. First though, let's take a look at each of the candidates and what their main policies are.
The Police and Crime Commissioner elections are coming up on Thursday the 6th of May, in which you will decide who takes on the role for the next 4 years. But what actually is a Police and Crime Commissioner, or PCC, and what do they do?
Well, they're elected by you. I mean, obviously, that's why we're having an election. And they're basically there to act as the middleman between you and the police force.
The role is to be the voice of the people and also to hold the police to account.
They set the police budget as well as what the top priorities of the force will be. And it's all very handily published in their police and crime plan.
A PCC is a largely strategic role, so they won't be out there making arrests, but they do work closely with a range of organisations, including councils and voluntary or community groups.
Now, if you're anything like me, you'll have had one of these come through your door, a polling card. Now, I'll be taking one of these down to my local polling station in just 7 days' time, where I can decide which candidate and party to go for.
But who are they? Well, there's Matthew Scott, the Conservative candidate. He's held the role for the last 5 years and is seeking re-election. He believes the biggest issue facing the county's police is antisocial behaviour.
First 5 years have been around rebuilding, getting police numbers back up, getting crime down, working with victims to give them the support they need. I want to build on from there. So we're going to recruit more police officers. We're going to put more police officers back in our schools, expand the cadets programme, carry on the relentless focus with drugs and county lines. So we've done a lot so far, but there is still more I want to do.
Next, there's Labour's Lola Oyewusi. She believes the biggest issue facing the county's police is resources.
If you don't have resources, if you don't have money, if you don't have enough officers on the ground, you don't have the equipment that you need, you cannot tackle county lines, you cannot tackle knife crimes, you cannot tackle antisocial behaviour, and you cannot actually be a police force for all, because resources is the mega thing that we need here in Kent.
And there's Graham Colley from the Liberal Democrats. He believes the biggest issue facing the county's police is a presence on the streets.
We believe in community policing, but it's not just the old Bobby on the beat. We believe that community policing should include and relate to all local services, and that a community knows what it needs and it should care for itself. And once you increase the sense of community, then things such as antisocial behaviour are reduced.
So, come May the 6th, whose name will you be putting a cross next to? And who will you put in charge of fronting the police force for the next 4 years?
Well, Matthew Scott, you're the current Crime Commissioner for Kent. Back in 2012, turnout for the elections was around 16%. When you won, it was around 20%. That's not a very compelling mandate for the policy. What needs to change?
Well, I've been working hard over the last 5 years to promote the benefit of the role, and I think actually what you'll see this time is a much higher turnout because it's taking place on the same day as other elections. So there will be a higher turnout this time. We'll see what happens when the next election comes round when it's not on the same day. I don't think we'll be able to compare those statistics, but I've worked really hard. I've been knocking on doors, I've been going to community events, listening to the public. I've done everything I possibly can to promote the role and the benefit that it brings.
But isn't the problem here that people don't know really what the Commissioner does, and that's the flaw in the policy?
That's why I've been doing a lot of community engagements to explain what the role is. I mean, I think when you explain to people what the role is, they understand it. I think that they get it, they support it. We'll see what happens at the ballot box next Thursday.
Graham Colley, what do you think perhaps ought to change? Do you think commissioners need more powers than they currently have?
No, Lib Dem policy is to abolish the role of Police and Crime Commissioner. We believe that it could quite happily be dealt with by a chair of a committee and that you wouldn't need a separate Police and Crime Commissioner.
You want to return to the kind of obscure committee that wasn't even elected, it was appointed.
They were elected, but they weren't directly elected.
But don't you think having a single individual in charge of strategic oversight of the force, it improves accountability?
No, I don't. I think you've already made the argument. People aren't so interested. There'll be a higher turnout this time because it is with other local elections, but normally people just want the police to get on with it.
Well, Lola, what's your thoughts on whether the powers of commissioners need to be beefed up a bit?
I think basically the reason why people don't really know much about it is because there's not been enough visibility in the areas of where the police crime commissioner is concerned. Going out there, meeting the people, being part of the community, different communities, and also ensuring that you are there all the time for the people that need you, bigging up your voice, letting people know what your job is all about, actually having a big community event where people can actually come around and meet you on a one-to-one with the rest of your officers, talking about what your role is all about, and that would really encourage a lot of people. And just like what my other colleagues have said, because of COVID and because this election is done in a different way, and we know that a lot of people are going to be voting because there's 2 elections going on. In some places that they're even having 4 elections going on. And also people are going to be using their postal votes more than ever before. So that can, in a way, will give this much, much bigger presence than ever before.
Well, Matthew, the context of communities being much more closely involved in policing is fundamental to the commissioner's job. Do you think that works effectively? I mean, you're one person. Kent is a huge county, and Medway a big, large urban authority. You can't get around all of it in.
No, but if we've learned anything over the last year, it's in fact have been able to do even more than I was doing before. I was attending parish council meetings, community events, IPAG events, events organised by the local community, where hundreds and in some respects, like the Open Day, thousands of people were turning up. I've worked really hard to get out and about to improve the visibility. And it's very easy to say that it hasn't, we're just opposed. No, it hasn't, yes. But we've got lots more engagement that has been going on with religious groups, with different communities. The evidence is there for people to see, and people tell me they've noticed it.
Graham, what's your sense of the way it works in Kent?
Yeah, well,
is a very large
Lib Dems are the party of community politics. We believe in a community police service. Everything should be brought to as local a level as possible.
What does that mean? What would that mean, though, for the?
Well, that would mean a more police visibility locally, but also police who are involved in the community more. And if you encourage the community and the community to become stronger, then antisocial behaviour is likely to become less.
Lola, that's a way of countering what for some people is a very big issue, isn't it? Antisocial behaviour. And one of the complaints is often made that when they contact the police aren't able to take much action over it, or it takes a long time for them to come and visit and chat about it.
Yeah, what I've always said about antisocial behaviour, like I've said before, going back to one of my pledges for the community, is having a police force for all, and having a policing that community is at the heart of it. And when I say community at the heart of policing, it's you, me, and everybody out there. We're all the community, and we need to work in partnership, work together to support our police officers. We know who these people that causes the antisocial behavior is in our community. But when we engage as a community, looking out for one another, working in partnership with the police, we'll be able to tackle the issue of antisocial behavior much, much better than the way it is at the moment. Young people need to be engaged, and we need to look for ways to engage these young people so we can reduce the numbers of antisocial behavior that is being caused. It's because there's nothing for them to do. I am somebody who walks all around Kent communities, rebuilding communities. That is my day job. And I know what I'm saying. Basically, we need to be good neighbors. We need to start engaging more with the neighborhood watch, the speed watch. We just need to do more as community supporting our police officers and doing what is best, ensuring that even our young people, when they engage, they are being trained to know the importance and the impact of
Lola, I just want to get a quick question into Matthew, because one of the questions we've had submitted is from the Medway African and Caribbean Association, who says, we haven't had much engagement with the PCC despite asking. Why has there been very little information sent out in the post about these elections and their candidates?
Well, I have engaged with members of that organisation, and my team is working really hard to get literature out across the whole county. We've got hundreds of thousands of bits of literature going around, and I've reached out individually to a number of groups, whether they are from black charities, which I have funded with their support for mental health, the mosques that I have visited during the course of my term, the Jewish community, which I've supported as well. I've reached out to a number of groups. I'm sorry that they feel that way, but we have had correspondence with them in my office as well.
Graham, I mean, how's the Liberal Democrat campaign working? Because you
I think we're very pleased with it. We're concentrating on social media with Facebook and with a website and putting out Twitter feeds. So, yeah, it's going well.
Well, when we come back after this quick break, we'll be looking at the relationship between the community and the police and what can be done to bridge any supposed gap. Don't go away.
The Police and Crime Commissioner elections are coming up on Thursday the 6th of May, in which you will decide who takes on the role for the next 4 years. But what actually is a Police and Crime Commissioner, or PCC, and what do they do?
Well, they're elected by you. I mean, obviously, that's why we're having an election. And they're basically there to act as the middleman between you and the police force.
The role is to be the voice of the people and also to hold the police to account.
They set the police budget as well as what the top priorities of the force will be. And it's all very handily published in their police and crime plan.
A PCC is a largely strategic role, so they won't be out there making arrests, but they do work closely with a range of organisations, including councils and voluntary or community groups.
Now, if you're anything like me, you'll have had one of these come through your door, a polling card. Now, I'll be taking one of these down to my local polling station in just 7 days' time, where I can decide which candidate and party to go for.
But who are they? Well, there's Matthew Scott, the Conservative candidate. He's held the role for the last 5 years and is seeking re-election. He believes the biggest issue facing the county's police is antisocial behaviour.
First 5 years have been around rebuilding, getting police numbers back up, getting crime down, working with victims to give them the support they need. I want to build on from there. So we're going to recruit more police officers. We're going to put more police officers back in our schools, expand the cadets programme, carry on the relentless focus.
Welcome back to our special hustings with the Police and Crime Commissioner candidates from the three parties who are standing in next week's poll. Now, the relationship between the community and the police has come under scrutiny worldwide recently following the Black Lives Matter movement. But what's the relationship like between the force and communities here in Kent? One former Kent police officer says the public have lost trust in the force, but believes that whoever is the next commissioner has the chance to rebuild that trust. Ollie Collins has this report.
Following the death of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement has aimed to ignite a conversation about the relationship between the police and the community it serves all around the world. And it's no different here in Kent. One former officer believes the force is losing the trust of the public.
On the whole, the relationship which is concerning for me as an ex-officer is that the police is losing the confidence of the public. And that really concerns me, especially the public that relates to my community, which is the minority ethnic and black community.
Certainly as a community, I think they're not as visible as they need to be. I'd want to see them do more around trust and confidence in the community, particularly with the black community, where we know there's disproportionality in terms of stop and search, also in terms of representation in the force. You know, despite some of the efforts that they've made in terms of recruitment and retention, they need to be doing more. You know, we hear about this diversity academy with no information at all. So I think I'd like to see a bit more openness, a bit more visibility, a lot more engagement with the community.
Carol believes that to improve the relationship between Kent Police and the community, they should have open conversations with organisations like the Medway African and Caribbean Association.
When organisations like MACA try to engage with them, they need to make the most of that opportunity, and sadly I don't think they're doing enough to do that. I know that they have a county IPAG, but certainly what we want to do is to have a very different conversation, a lot more open and honest and transparent conversation with them. So I think that certainly through the Police and Crime Commissioner, I think that they should be talking to us.
Chief Inspector Coretta Hine said whilst Kent Police has been graded outstanding for legitimacy for the last 4 years, which means the public can have confidence that our officers treat people with respect and dignity, we appreciate that this is not always the perception shared by every member of our community. We will not be complacent and we will continue to work hard and listen carefully to the views of everyone we work with. Wendell thinks that there needs to be more direct interaction with the Police and Crime Commissioner.
I go into my community daily and I say to them, you cannot have this adversarial interaction with the police. But they always say to me, we try, but nobody's listening. And I do hope that after this election of PCCs, if we have a new PCC or if we have the old PCC, that they become a little bit more approachable for members of the public and interact more with people and listen to their suggestions.
So how can we bridge the apparent gap between the police and the black community?
Well, Lola, let's come to you on this one. Does this represent a moment when things can be changed in terms of the relationship with police and the public, particularly BAME people?
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And as we were saying earlier on, one of those work is basically developing a relationship with, the Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities, building the gap and rebuilding the trust. And that needs to happen, and it needs to happen quickly.
So why are you best placed to do it when these guys aren't?
Well, at the moment, even before this position even came up, I have been working behind the scene to actually build that relationship. I'm one of the pioneers of the Nigerian communities here in Kent and Medway. And one of the things I've initiated is actually to meet up with one of the chief officers and have a conversation about how we can be working together and how we can support one another. And I've actually even got one of my adopted son to join the IPAG, who is now a voice for our community. And that relationship needs to be, spread across all our counties. We need to ensure that it's not only just, Black, Asian, minority ethnic group that we need to rebuild our trust with, even other communities as well. Because the trust is not just broken within our communities, it's even broken with some other communities outside of our communities.
Well, Matthew, Scott, let's come to you. I mean, do you have a plan which would help rebuild the trust? Because 2 or 3 questions we've had submitted touch on this issue, that they feel that minority groups have not been given a fair hearing in some policing issues.
Well, I think if we look at the facts, Kent Police is rated the best in the country for how it works with local communities.
Yes, but is that the experience of people, though, or what the audits tell us?
It's been independently inspected to say that it's the best in the country. The only police force 4 years in a row outstanding in this area. And when you look at all of the schemes that they run, the independent policing advisory groups, which Lola correctly mentions, they don't just look at local communities, they look at different issues such as use of force, such as stop and search, such as county lines, such as young people as well. There are lots of different ways where the police can use the local community to engage better. They've also got community liaisons who will work with specific communities in local districts to understand the challenges and learn from them and work with them to build solutions. There's an awful lot that is going up. But also we have to acknowledge, though, that trust in policing across the country is actually very high when you compare it across different sectors. Police officers and staff here in Kent and across the whole country do actually retain the trust on the whole of the public.
Well, Rebecca Felola, and I apologise if I've mispronounced that name, says the trust between the black community and the police. How would you go about rebuilding this relationship? Graham?
I think that the police, like all organisations, have a culture. And whilst the Kent Police do their best to try and be inclusive, they have a police culture, and that needs to change to bring more and different cultures into it. And if that happens, then they will understand those cultures.
Would you like to see some kind of quotas around this issue?
No, I don't think you should have quotas. It should just be encouraged and should have more. I don't think you have strict quotas, but you encourage and you bring people in all sorts of ways. At the moment, there is, people have a view of what police are like, and generally that is what they appear, and you need to change that.
Lola?
Yes, I was just going to quickly say that one of the things that I did as well is basically to look at the way the recruitment of police officers are being done within Kent. When I met with the chief officers, I realized that all the materials that they were using to campaign did not have anyone from the BME communities on it as of that time. I had to point it out to them, even while we were in the police station, say, look at all your campaign materials. Where are the BME faces on it? They eventually changed it, and then I signposted them as well to go and start advertising about their recruitment on channels, on channels where it's predominantly for black people or for people from, BME communities, so that people can know that they have the opportunity, they also have the chance to actually, apply to be part of the policing here in Kent. We need to have aspirational targets. We need to have aspirational targets for people from the BME community, because at the moment, the percentage of the officers that we have from the BME community does not represent the diverse culture that we now have here in Kent. I have lived here for over 20 years, and I know what it's like back then to what it is now.
Well, Matthew, not enough faces from other minority groups within Kent Police Force. I mean, is that a fair criticism? Would you like to see more effort put into that?
We've been putting in substantial amounts of effort into that, and throughout the time I've been there, they've been using advertising materials, including officers of all backgrounds, advertising on all channels. And, when I would visit different religious groups, I was taking the recruitment team with me, standing outside of mosques and visiting different communities, taking them with me so that we would be visible to them. Yes, it's correct to say that Kent Police, if you look exclusively at ethnic minority membership, it's low. It has been historically low. It's been a problem across policing in the UK. But the good news is we have made some real progress. The number of people coming through the most recent intakes have been double what the rest of the force has been. And actually, the number of applications which are coming into Kent Police now are at about the same level as the BAME community was when the last census was done. So it's going to take a very long time for those effects to be felt and to be seen visibly.
So why not have a better mechanism like a target?
Because targets always
aspirational targets we need.
Targets always drive perverse behaviours. And when you have targets, you can hit a target but miss the point. So what you need to do is you need to understand and you need to listen and you need to work, which is what the Kemp Police recruitment team have done. And they've done a brilliant job over the last 5 years recruiting 665 extra officers. But you're not going to change it overnight. And setting targets will, as they always do, drive perverse behaviours.
Well, Graham, I want to give you another chance.
Yeah, I go back to the point that the culture of a police force is white, male and macho, and you need to bring in all sorts of other groups into that to change that culture so that the police represent the people. The people are the police and the police are the people. So you've got to make the culture the same as that of the whole community.
Well, I mean, you raised an important point, which Lola might want to comment on, is retention is as important as recruitment, isn't it? I mean,
they're both important because, you know, when you have a good retention, it means you have people who are actually well experienced to do and deliver the job. And one of the things that I've done as well to help is having Kent Police, you know, recruitment people to attend most of the events that we do as the black community, to come and talk about their recruitment, you know, advertisements and everything else that they're doing, so that people from our communities can have a better understanding the career progression and the career opportunities that actually exist within Kent Police. So someone like Diane Middleton, I think that's her second name. She's been to a couple of my events, and I'm still doing it, and I will continue to do it because I want a better relationship with my communities, with the black communities, and the Asian communities, the minority ethnic communities, with the police, and we need to see people that represent us.
OK, well, that takes us up to the next break. Coming up afterwards, experts in Kent fear lockdown has made county lines problems worse and are calling for more to be done to crack down on it. Don't go away. Welcome back to our Kent Police and Crime Commissioner Hustings live on KMTV. Now, experts in Kent fear lockdown has only made county lines problems worse and are calling for more to be done to crack down on it. 49 arrests were made by Kent Police in March alone in relation to county lines offences. But many say there needs to be more focus on helping vulnerable people and preventing them from joining the drug networks in the first place. Christina Curtis has this report.
There's calls for more to be done to crack down on county lines and drug crimes in Kent. Experts fear the problem is starting to spiral and more vulnerable people in the county are being exploited.
Quite often, vulnerable young children are brought into this trade and exploited as couriers and deliverers of those substances that are being ordered over the phone. And that's the main concern we have in Kent, I think. It's about this exploitation of young people in county lines drug deliveries.
And many believe lockdown has had a negative impact on the issue.
There's been a massive increase in drug use during lockdown. And coming out of lockdown, drug users have got huge debts that they can't pay and owe gang members and drug dealers a lot of money. So there's an increase in crime. And I think one of the things that we forget is that young people in Kent are very much on the peripheral and very, very vulnerable to these opportunities that are being provided for them.
In March alone, there were 49 arrests made by Kent Police's County Lines and Gangs team, which shows that there's been recent activity in relation to these crimes in the county. In the same month, the Kent Police team also made 32 drug seizures, as well as recovered £15,000 in cash, and 33 charges were brought against alleged offenders. Meanwhile, a number of county line drug dealers with links to Kent were found guilty, receiving a combined sentence of 56 years and 10 months in prison. But although action is being taken, many say they want to see more changes in the approach to how county lines and drug crime is tackled in the county.
We're talking about a large illegal market. There's billions of pounds flowing through this market. So what we need to do is to reduce the demand for these substances, and the people who get into wanting heroin and crack tends to be the most vulnerable, the most damaged people in our society. So if we can prevent that vulnerability and damage by reducing poverty and protecting our children, then we'll be solving that problem in the long term.
We must have diverse approaches to engage young people that are at the stage where they could get into trouble. And that's the time to capture them. Afterwards, it's too late. They're in that culture. The behaviour is embedded. And it takes a lot more money and investment to then undo that behaviour. Why can't we just start early and change that culture from the onset?
But with many fearing the problem is only getting worse, the question they're wondering is what can be done to try and resolve county lines and drug crime in Kent. Christina Curtis for KMTV.
Well, we have a question submitted by James Chesby, which reads, if you are elected for the Police and Crime Commissioner, how would you go about collaborative working with other police and crime commissioners in the South East to deal with the scourge of county lines offending? Matthew Scott, how would you?
Well, the good news is that work is already happening both at a PCC level and at a police force level. The number of county lines in Kent over the last 18 months has reduced. They're seizing more drugs, they're making more arrests because the police are working better together locally with the Met Police and also on a regional basis as well. And as PCCs, we work together to collate evidence and best practice and ideas about different schemes that we can run to engage with young people, such as the St Giles Trust, who mentor young people to get out of county lines. So we've made really good progress in this area.
I mean, is it a thing that you can totally eradicate?
Well, we'll do. The focus has been relentless. That's the effort. But with a crime like county lines, it's very much at times you can take some out and one will try and spring up in its place. The good news is the number has fallen. We're keeping those numbers down. We've declared Swale and Tunbridge and Malling free of county lines for at least 5 months, and other districts are not far behind. So that work is going on, and it is being a tremendous success.
Lola, we know these organised gangs have, tremendously agile in outwitting or trying to outwit the police. Is there something which could be done which isn't presently being done, in your view, about county lines?
There's always room for improvement. The Kent Police they're doing what they can with the resources that they have at the moment, and obviously there's always room for improvement. And one of the rooms for improvement is better working relationship with people like Sadiq Khan, with Metropolitan Police, and with all the other local police officers and local authorities outside of Kent, and also having initiatives that basically protect our young people, initiatives that basically encourage more of maybe retired people to come up and be volunteers for us and be community safety officers in our schools, where those children who are being targeted, or even in our communities, where those vulnerable people who are being targeted are well looked out for. And that can easily even cut and reduce these drug issues much, much lesser than what it is at the moment. 3 crimes are really, really high in Kent at the moment: theft, violence, and drugs. And we need to ensure that we have much, much robust and solid initiatives on ground that will work much better than what we have at the moment. And that is what I keep coming back to. Community must be at the heart of policing, where we all come together and have a say in how policing is being delivered. It's one of my key pledges, and that needs to be paramount.
I would take a different approach. I would look at things radically and ask why county lines is happening. And county lines is happening because monopoly profits are being made out of drug sales. So how do you deal with that? You get rid of the profits. And 5 years ago, in 2016, Nick Clegg and Richard Branson wrote an article in the Guardian saying the drugs war has been lost. County lines has very much arisen since that time. What we should be doing is managing the drugs problem, managing the peace.
What do you mean by managing the drugs problem?
It is Lib Dem policy to decriminalise cannabis, and other drugs should be treated as a medical problem, not as a problem of law enforcement.
Lola, I know you talked about decriminalisation of cannabis. Would that help in some?
I believe that it would help, because all we're looking at is actually one of Labour pledges as well. What we're saying is to decriminalise drugs through Royal Commission, putting it under public health, where addiction is treated like an illness, and those who are addicted can actually get the help and support that they need to put them back on track and give them a better life, rather than locking people up, especially young people who are vulnerable, locking them up and ruining their future. And we see that this has actually worked in so many countries. And I don't know why here, when we see something works well in other countries, why we don't try it. It's worked well in Portugal, it's worked well in Spain, it's worked well even in Netherlands, it's worked well in some other parts of the world. Why is it that we always wait until lives are destroyed? We've seen the example of that even with COVID, the way that we dealt with it here in United Kingdom. We had the opportunity to emulate what happened in Germany. We had the opportunity to copy what happened, in New Zealand, so that lives will not be lost. But still, we left everything too late. 127,000 people died. And the same mistake again we're making where drugs issues are concerned. If something works, why can't we try it? At least we know that we've given it a chance.
There you go. If something works, why not try it, Matthew? I mean, Kent's a progressive county, likes to think it is anyway. Maybe it's time for some experiments in this way.
Well, I think people need to be clear what decriminalisation actually means. Are we talking about decriminalisation of possession, which means people are still buying it from criminals, or are we talking about liberalisation? And in that respect, I think that if you start to liberalise these things and make them more easily accessible, you'll be sitting on a big public health problem of explosion. There's so much evidence about the damage that things like cannabis can cause. So I think that the approach has to be, yes, let's get the drugs off the streets, let's get the money off the criminals, but let's take it off them, let's put them in prison, because these people are not just drug dealers, they are child traffickers, they are modern-day slavery experts. They do not deserve to get away with it, and decriminalisation would let them get away with it.
Sorry, can I just say quickly as well that locking people up in prison don't change people, because we've seen it. People still smuggle drugs into prison, and it's not working. Locking people up in prison doesn't really solve the problem. We need to go to the root of the problem, take the power away from the drug, warlords, take money away from those who are making money at the back of those who are vulnerable.
Yeah, if there isn't money to be made out of drugs, gangsters will not get involved in it.
Exactly.
Well, this sounds like a strategy for cutting the serpent's head off. Is that what you're going to the top and getting to the gangs? I mean, maybe that's where...
Which is exactly what is happening at the moment. That's why the number of county lines is falling, the number of people being prosecuted is increased, and the arrests are going up. The way in which other parties talk about this problem is, I think it's more about they like the idea of a group of people who just want to smoke cannabis all the time, which is, is just not acceptable. This is a bigger problem. This is a public health explosion that is waiting to happen, just like many other things that have come before. If tobacco was a thing that was only just starting now, if alcohol was only a thing that was just starting now, you wouldn't liberalise it.
Well,
we should exactly the same.
Would you take the same approach to alcohol? Because
alcohol exists. Yeah, alcohol already exists. Drugs are already a problem, and you're not going to get away from it. What you've got to do is manage it as a health problem.
Can I also say that there are some people who are actually taking cannabis for medical reasons? Are we going to be locking them up as well in prison when we're supposed to help them, support them to get better? If it's under the public health and it's being well managed, wouldn't that be a better approach rather than just lock people up?
And of course,
even though they're using it for medical purposes.
Cannabis is legal.
Well, we may pick up on this after the break, but when we do, we'll have a look at why some crimes in Kent have almost doubled and how will our candidates tackle this concerning issue. See you shortly. Welcome back to our Kent Police and Crime Commissioner Hustings live on KMTV. Now, recent figures show violent crimes across Kent have almost doubled since the last election in 2016. Violent crimes reported to Kent Police now total around 6,000 every month. Antisocial behaviour, criminal damage and arson all remain the most common crimes reported to the force. However, public order allegations are now rising at an alarming rate. Rachel Lewis has more.
It's always a mixed picture for any force, and official statistics often tell a different story. So how does Kent Police fare when it comes to dealing with crime? According to the latest figures from the force for the period of March 2020 to February 2021, violent crime accounted for more than a third of all offences in the county, with nearly 80,000 crimes reported. However, this figure hasn't changed compared to the previous year. Antisocial crime rose by 58% during the pandemic, with more than 55 offences.
Oh, right. No, don't spit. Don't spit. Just calm down, please, mate. Don't kick off, please, mate. I've got corona.
Taking a look at shoplifting, offences actually fell by 33%, with 8,900 crimes committed. The number of burglaries and robberies committed in Kent fell by a third. Criminal damage was also down by 13%, with 19,000 offences reported.
Well, Graham Colley, every police force has to balance its resources and deploy them where they see fit. If your policy of promoting more community involvement, more bobbies on the beat, as it were, isn't that going to take away from the resources you have to tackle some of these more serious crimes?
Well, in terms of crimes of violence, if you have a better community, then it's likely that those crimes of violence will reduce. Clearly, there are all sorts of crimes of violence. There's domestic violence, and if you look at that radically, then you should be looking at why there's domestic violence, and it often goes from generation to generation. And you look at the causes, and then through consultation and mediation and talking to people, you try and find out what the problems to try and bring an end to it.
Lola, we've had the domestic violence bill passed this week, and that's introduced new grounds on which police can investigate coercive and abusive behaviour. That's obviously a good thing, but it would involve more resources targeted at that if it's to be used effectively.
First of all, I want to say that my heartfelt condolences goes to the family of Julia, the female police community support officer who was violently, murdered here in Kent. It's a tragedy that shouldn't be happening in our communities. And my thoughts and prayers are with our family. And I pray that, the Lord gives them the strength to carry on. Talking about resources, fighting for more resources is one of my pledges. I would fight for more resources that Kent needs. I will be that voice that Priti Patel would not want to hear, because we need the resources to be able to tackle the issues that we have here in Kent. Over 22,000 crimes were logged between 2019 and 2020 here in Kent. And over 9,000 of those crimes were under violent crimes. We do need resources, and I will fight for more resources. And not only fighting for more resources, but also work with our communities to tackle the issue of inequalities and poverty. Because when we tackle the problems of inequalities and poverty, we'll also see a reduction in crime. Like I said, community must be at the heart of policing.
Matthew, I want to give you an opportunity to say something about the tragic death of Julia James.
Thank you, and I echo Lola's statement. The last week has been incredibly tough for the policing family in Kent and the policing family across the whole country. Julia was very well respected as a PCSO, as a person. She was very well loved in her local community. And what's happened to her is awful. And I cannot begin to imagine what the family is going through at the moment. And it's at times like these that the policing family does come together to support one another, to look after one another, and make sure that they've got all the support that they need. So my thoughts and condolences are with the family at this really important time. Following on from that statement, it does feel rather inappropriate talking about politics in that respect, because something tragic has happened in our county, and such tragedies are happening every day elsewhere. The assurance, and the only assurance I will give on this, is that I will carry on doing my utmost to protect people, whether they work in policing or whether they don't, from the harms, from the experiences that people have, that we continue to take the fight back to violent criminals, and we make our county safer for anyone. So I will not make any further political statements on that matter, because I think given the circumstances it's not appropriate.
Graham, what would you say?
I think I would like to add my thoughts to the family as well. It's a terrible tragedy for them, and it must be awful times, and obviously they're in the spotlight as well. Terrible.
Well, we all send our condolences to her family, and we've got more time to discuss some of these issues. So I did just want to touch on one aspect, Matthew, which is the increase in the police and crime council tax, the precept levied by the force, which you agreed because you set the budget. A lot of people will say, well, we don't see much activity around our neighbourhood. Well, why are we paying so much for police services?
Well, I've been clear that I would only ever ask people to pay more in council tax if they got something in return for it. So for the council tax rise this year of £1.25 per month, or £15 per year, that helps us pay for the 145 extra police officers, extra PCSOs going out into our communities to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. And before that, I've delivered 665 more police in this county, working with the government, not fighting the government, working with the government to get people the resources that they need. There's a lot more police here now than there've ever been.
Is that 600 in addition to the 500 that were lost, or because there's various ways you can look at this? Don't forget, the force. Yeah, lost 500 jobs.
It did, but we've got more police in Kent now, thanks to the work that I've done with the government, than we've ever had, and we're going to recruit 300 more. I will work with the government to deliver that. We will reach 4,145 police officers in this county because of the work that I have done, the work that I'm doing every day with the Home Office to fight for the resources that Kent needs, so that they actually understand the problems, and you're only going to get that if you vote Conservative.
Can I ask about the domestic violence bill? It's a good thing, obviously. Is Kent Police, under your stewardship, going to direct more of its resources at that particular type of crime?
Well, in Kent, the work that I've done with the force, we've been investing in this area of business for quite some time. In 2017, there was a substantial reorganisation of the resources, so that we've got vulnerability investigation teams now which look at specifically domestic abuse, sexual violence, stalking and harassment, hate crime, adult and child safeguarding. Many of the resources that we've recruited have gone into those areas, but a lot of them have gone out into community policing as well, our town centre teams, our rural teams, which people are seeing and commenting on. So we stand in a really good position for what is going to come. I hope it leads to more people reporting domestic abuse, and in fact, much of the, as Graham quite rightly pointed out, was the increase in violent crime we're seeing is more people reporting domestic abuse. This gives us a set definition to work with. It gives the victims more rights. I think the domestic abuse bill, I think all parties agree, is a good thing.
Well, we have a question on this issue, and that is why am I, as a Kent taxpayer, paying so much for services when I don't see any evidence of activity? I
just wanted to touch on that. When Matthew said £1.20 something or £1.50 a month, that's not for everybody, because as I sit here, my council tax goes up every year. And for this year, I'm paying £12 or nearly £13 extra on a monthly basis. We know what's happened over the year. A lot of people have lost their job. People are struggling to put food on the table. This is not the right time to be increasing council tax. And rightly what people said, when I get my council tax bill, it says 7.4% or 7.5% of the precinct is going for policing. I don't know what it's being used for until he's telling us now. We need more openness and transparency of what that money is going to be used for.
Yeah, over the past 40 years, there's been a gradual transfer from national resources being passed locally to raising council tax. The net effect of that is that the billionaires pay less tax and ordinary council taxpayers pay more. I think that there should be a reallocation so that the billionaires, the Amazons and the other large companies that get away with paying very little tax pay their share, because they benefit from policing services as much as anybody else does.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Matthew, what do you think of that idea?
Well, I think it forgets the fact that these companies also pay millions in national insurance, in business rates, in other taxes as well. But the measures that the government have put in place around corporation tax meant that large companies were paying billions of pounds more before the pandemic in taxes than they ever were before. So the tax system did get much fairer. But I think the question has to be asked. You know, we needed the resources to balance the books, to recruit the extra police officers, and working with the government, we've been able to deliver that. How do you deliver it otherwise? Where does the money come from? Where it comes from is it means fewer police officers, it means fewer PCSOs. If you vote Conservative, you're going to get more police officers. If you don't vote Conservative, you're just going to get a PCC who's just going to spend their time fighting and not making any progress at all.
Lola, I presume you don't agree with that, but we're running...
I do not agree with that at all, because what I was going to say is this. If you're going to increase taxes, if you're going to increase my council tax,
very quickly,
let me know what you're going to be spending the money on.
And we did.
No, nobody. I wasn't consulted. A lot of people were not consulted. I wasn't consulted. A lot of people sitting there were not consulted. We need to know. Community needs to know when you're going to be increasing their money, what it's going to be used for. We can't be paying extra money and we don't see what we're getting for it.
Well,
that's the
public consultation, which had 75% support for the proposal.
Against us. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll be back tomorrow with a special edition of Paul on Politics, reviewing some of the debate. Oh, sorry. Welcome back to the final part of our Kent Police and Crime Commissioner Hustings live on KMTV, which I prematurely tried to end earlier. The types of crime police have been called to deal with has changed significantly over the last year in Kent. Kent Police Federation believes there's been a surge in domestic violence and antisocial behaviour. However, has COVID changed crime? And have there been issues with the ever-changing rules? Katja Fowler has been taking a look.
Being called out to deal with, outside rule breaking has understandably shifted this year, with a reduction in theft and a surge in domestic violence. Though the Police Federation expect to see little permanent change in the patterns of crime in Kent as we move out of lockdown. However, they do say that the unprecedented backlog in the court system is something that needs to be addressed urgently to maintain the public's trust in the criminal justice system.
And clearly our key concern for our members that are investigating crimes is the amount of time that potentially, once the matter passes to our victim care unit, that it could take to come to court. And the worry is that sort of long gap could actually cause some of our victims to disengage, which is the last thing that we want, and we're keen to encourage them to stick with us on that journey.
Throughout a difficult year, Neil believes that the police force have had to tread a fine line when it comes to policing the many and varied restrictions, guidelines and rules that have been brought in.
I'm going to be giving you a COVID ticket.
The public have been really, really great and very supportive and understanding of all the requirements. And I don't think there's been a particular issue. I think there's been a very small minority of situations that the police have had to intervene in.
They've used the 4 E's approach: engage, explain, encourage and enforce. However, others say that not all officers have stuck to this. As a photographer, Andy was covering the Napier Barracks story when he was arrested and held by Kent Police for 7 hours.
I showed my press pass to the police officers that arrested me. They dismissed it and said that they were still going to take me in. Then a week later, they realised that there was no case against me at all, so they dropped all charges. But about 2 days after they dropped the charges, I received a letter saying that I had breached COVID regulations. I was going to be fined £200 for breaching COVID regulations. So it said in the letter that I was out working, and they still sent me the fine.
Once his solicitor pointed out that he wasn't breaking regulations as he was working, the fine was also dropped.
Some of the problem has been around the fact that some is law and some is guidance. And I think there was an element of confusion both among the public and our officers to some extent because of the speed and rapidity with which the legislation and guidance separately were coming out. So there's been a balance that needed to be struck.
And though there may be disagreement on whether they've always got the balance right, Neil says that maintaining and improving community relationships is the key to keeping both the public and officers safer as we move beyond lockdown.
Some of the disgusting behaviour of some of the suspects that we've seen, including spitting, coughing and threatening COVID. We police by consent in this country, and it's vital that we have the support of the public.
Katja Fowler for KMTV.
Matthew Scott, it's said justice seen is justice delivered, but there's a real problem with a logjam, isn't there, in cases coming to court? How do you think that's going to be addressed?
Well, there have been, unfortunately, Kent's estate doesn't lend itself to social distancing very easily, and they've had some challenges in that respect out of their control. I know that court staff have worked hard to make as many trials happen as possible, but in the circumstance it hasn't been so easy. But I've been working with ministers to secure Nightingale Court facilities so that we can get extra capacity we need to hear those trials quicker and sooner. And
they could take place in some of these magistrates' courts that have been closed in Kent over the recent years.
Well, they've been looking at all options, and the good thing is that I think we've made some positive progress. They've identified a site. Hopefully, the business case will be approved, and that we'll have our Nightingale Court. But that's been achieved again by me working with government, working with the court service to make sure we make the case and get the facilities we need, because we can't have justice delayed.
Graham.
As chair of Lib Dem lawyers, I fought against the austerity cuts, which fell very heavily on the Ministry of Justice. And out of that, they weren't willing to allow early release of prisoners, so it was the court service that took the blow. That problem was there before the pandemic, and it's been made even worse because of it.
Ola.
Justice denied is justice delayed. You can tell that to the victims. Victims need answers. They need things done, as quickly as possible. They need that judgment to be passed, and we can no longer, wait. I'm a woman. I've been a victim of crime, and I know what it's like. When you, as a victim, you think you haven't got any voice, where the criminals are actually having a free lunch, and you, that is being affected, you are there, not knowing what's going to happen. Physically, mentally, you're not okay, because some people are delaying sentencing those who have actually committed a crime. So please do remember that when you're casting your vote. A vote for Lola is a vote for you.
Matthew, I mean, the other aspect of COVID has obviously been these changing regulations and guidance, which have left some people confused, and Kent Police doling out thousands of fines. I mean, they're trying their best, aren't they? But is that the best way to use resources? I mean...
Well, in terms of the fines that they've been issuing, I think it was right that we had a sanctions regime, because there have been people who have been committing egregious breaches of the coronavirus regulations, having large events, opening when they shouldn't be, and causing risks to everybody else. So,
but you must have seen, like all of us, have seen groups of more than 6 people gathering prior to the relaxation of restrictions. It's just an impossible job, isn't it?
It was very difficult, but it is one that I think the force overall have done very well. And the independent report, which came out a couple of weeks ago on how police forces handled COVID-19, said that Kent Police were exemplary in how they dealt with it. They attended most of the breaches that they could, what were being reported to them. They were using the fines fairly and actually identified as best practice, because they weren't just issuing the fines, they were scrutinising them subsequently to make sure that they were correct. And
were they proportionate though? Because we've seen fines of £10,000 slapped on, groups of not big groups, but just enough people to break the kind of restrictions.
Well, there had to be something in place, because whilst there may have been 16 people at a function, there may have been 60 or 300 people at a function. The rules were put in place to keep people safe. They knowingly broke the rules, then I think the fine was proportionate, and they would get their day in court if they wished to fight against it. We had to have a sanctions regime to make sure we kept the public safe. And on the whole, the Kent public, just like Kent Police, have done a really good job over the last year or so.
Well, we've had a question on fly tipping, which I know is not Kent Police's direct responsibility. It's the County Council and Medway Council. But police has powers to enforce fines on those who are found guilty. Yeah. Collie, I mean, is this something that you're registering a big...
Well, I think it comes back to the point that we were discussing earlier about monopoly profits. People dump rubbish in rural areas because it's cheaper to do so than to take it to a tip. The way to overcome the problem is to reduce the charges for the tips so that people can take the stuff there and unload it legally.
Lola, you having lots of people complaining about fly tipping.
Yes.
You do notice it when you're driving around, don't
Yes, a lot of people have, actually spoken to me. I've got tons of emails about what am I going to do about fly tipping. Well, one of my pledges is to work closely with the rural and coastal communities, bringing rural back on policing map. Fly tipping is, as far as I'm concerned, is a serious issue, and the sanctions needs to be really, really robust, so that those who are actually causing this, this problem will learn a hard lesson. People should not just get a slap on the wrist, because you are actually going to trespassing on somebody's property, on somebody's land, destroying their livelihood, and you're expecting to get away with it. No. So it also comes down to having more resources on ground.
Okay. Well, one other crime we did want to touch on is the dog theft. It seems to be becoming more prevalent and more cases of it. Matthew, is Kent Police got a special division to tackle dog theft?
We've got multiple resources in place to tackle dog theft. Everything from the local investigation by local policing teams, the dog unit are specialist advisors on this issue. We've given them all microchip readers so they can help reunite lost dogs with their owners, and they will advise on investigations too. And so seriously that this is being taken, that one of the investigations which is currently going on is being undertaken by the Chief Constable's own crime squad. There are a lot of resources which have been put in place to deal with this important issue. The The numbers are relatively consistent over the last 3 years. We're not seeing a major rise of the figure that's been described nationally of 170%. That's not true locally. But I do recognise that this is a big issue for families. In some circumstances, it's people's only companion. I give the assurance I'm talking to Kemp Police about this very regularly at the moment. They've got lots of resources in place to tackle this issue and hopefully bring people to justice.
Right, well, we are nearing the end of the programme, so I'm going to give each of our candidates 20 seconds to say why they want people to vote for you. Lola, you go first.
My key pledges to you is to tackle the issue of drug-related crimes, antisocial behaviour, county line crimes, to fight for more resources for Kent, to ensure that we have a police for all, to work with the Chief Constable Alan Pusely constructively and independently, and to have a police for all. A vote for me is a vote for the community.
Graham.
Thank you.
Yes, I will dedicate myself to building a community police service so that the local police officers are working with local people. I believe that we should look radically at problems and to find a solution for them, to look at new solutions, because solutions that have been tried in the past have not been successful because we still have crime. And finally, I believe
Matthew,
we should look after the police.
Quick word from you, Matthew. 10 seconds.
Only by voting Conservative will you get more police in Kent and more police on the street. Crime was falling before the pandemic. We will bring it back down. We'll expand the police cadet scheme and put more police in schools, and we will continue the fight against county line and drugs. Only by voting Conservative will you get all of those things.
Well, that really does bring an end to our special hustings meeting. So thanks to our guests for joining us today for a very vigorous and interesting debate. Don't forget you can vote next week, next Thursday, and we'll be covering the count as we get it in. Have a good evening, goodbye, and thanks very much for taking part and watching.